With our next raid tier being not too far away, I wanted to look back at our last one and kind of talk about my healer experience. Now, I've been playing healer for years, but most of my playtime on the role has been spent in dungeons and occasionally an extreme trial. The amount of savage fights that I've healed, I can probably count on both hands, and I also never completed an ultimate on the role before. Now, even when it comes down to Savage, I always played it way after release, where people were used to the mechanics and we also had a fair amount of gear under our belt. So me playing well wasn't really that important. Now, I've raided on tank and DPS numerous times, so I at least wanted to main healer for one tier at some point, and this tier just happened to be the one. Wasn't expecting to take it into ultimate per se, but I'm happy that I did because it was a good experience. However, now that I have played it as my main role for these past few months, I don't see myself maining healer in another raid tier or ultimate fight for that matter, unless it's kind of needed. Like everyone has a job that they want to play and the healer spot is the last one that is left over, then I wouldn't mind playing it again, but I would prefer to play tank or DPS. Now, when it comes down to prog, that is where I feel like playing healer was the most fun. You're trying to figure out how to heal mechanics, where to best use your mitigation, etc. Figuring that stuff out is really fun. There's also of course the on-the-fly adjusting that you might need to do when people mess up a mechanic, and the recovering of a pull is something that requires some improvisation at times, and that was kind of fun, but I'm also quite bad at that, and even up to this point I'd say that it is my biggest weakness as a healer. When I play tank for example and something goes south, I usually know pretty quickly what I need to do to be able to salvage a pull in some way. But when I'm on healer, I usually just end up using resources that I shouldn't, or I go to spamming AoE shields, then that is totally unnecessary. In those situations, my inexperience really shows, and even after having cleared what is arguably the hardest fight in the game, I still struggle with those things, and I often rely on my co-healers to help me out there. Also, healing people that might have missed a shield or that dropped a little bit too low for comfort on the fly is something that I'm really bad at. I might spot it really fast that they need something from me, but me actually giving them something just takes too much time, or it'll result in me losing uptime, which neither of those things are good. It happens quite often that I'll notice somebody needs a heal, but then I'm like trying to figure out where the hell my mouse is on the screen, then clicking on them and actually giving them a heal. It just takes like 2 or 3 GCDs, which it shouldn't take that long at all. So there's definitely still a lot for me to learn. When you do a fight a lot of times, like an ultimate, things become second nature. You know exactly what buttons you're going to be pressing where, and it doesn't matter if I am clueless about the job that I'm playing when I go into a fight like that. By the time that we're 1000 pulls in, I'm going to look like I'm great at playing whatever class it is that I'm playing. However, as soon as something goes wrong and I need to salvage a situation or a rotation, if I'm playing a DPS for example, that is where the cracks will start to show. So I can heal fights just fine after some practice, but when things go wrong, that is where I will start to struggle. And that is also where the mastery of a class or a role will start to show. On a class that I've played a lot, like let's say Gunbreaker, if I end up dying to something at some point, I'll be able to get my rotation back on track for the next burst window, and I'll also know what cooldowns I could use for a next upcoming tank buster or raid-wide mitigation, in case I need to coordinate something with my co-tank because he now did my mechanic for me because I was dead for example. But I can do that because I'm comfortable on Gunbreaker and I know how the class functions, and I've also played tank a lot, so I know how the role functions and what might need to happen. But if I were to go in and let's say play Monk for example, as soon as something goes wrong, my entire rotation is just out of the window. Now luckily enough, healer doesn't really have a DPS rotation, but I might mess things up when it comes down to using certain mitigation or healing tools that I should be saving for a next mechanic. I'm certainly getting better at gauging what I can and can't use, especially at parts where this extra adjusting might be needed a little bit more often, like for example the first mechanic in top or during phase 3 as well, but on other parts where this adjusting usually isn't needed, I'll probably mess up a fair bit or resort to spamming GCDs because I'm not used to adjusting on those parts of the fight, like I'm not mentally prepared for it, let's say. So those are definitely still some things that could use work. Am I happy with my performance on the role? Not really. For casual content, I'm good, but when it comes down to harder content like Week 1 Savage or Ultimate, that is where I still have a lot of room to grow. Now, when it comes down to actually playing the job, As I mentioned before, prog is the most fun. Now, once prog is done and you've optimized the fights a little bit, that is where my enjoyment of the role goes down drastically, because usually once something is on farm, I get enjoyment out of performing my DPS rotation. It's why you'll often see that when I play tank, I'll prog a fight on warrior, because warrior is easy to play, and that means that I can put my full focus on mechanics, but once stuff is on farm, I'll usually end up playing gunbreaker, because the rotation is more involved. With healer, you don't really have that. Your DPS rotation is very bare bones. Now, for something like top, ultimate, this was great because it meant that I could put like 99% of my focus on the mechanics. But for savage, it did leave some things to be desired, which is also why I'll also be going back to playing something that is not a healer next raid tier. Also, one more thing that I kind of want to mention on the side is that single target healing just feels kind of bad, and I really wish that we could set up some proper macros to mouse over heal instead. Now, I do know that there's third-party tools out there that make this feel really good, but I don't want to use third-party tools because as a content creator you should lead by example. But seeing how Square Enix has been implementing some third-party tool features into the game as of late, I really do hope that this is another one that they'll add in. That way I never have to untarget the boss, and that makes keeping DPS uptime so much easier, and I don't have to swap between targets every time I need to single target heal someone, be it a GCD or an off GCD. So yeah, that's like the highest thing on my list of functions that I would like to see implemented, or well, I guess in this case made better, because mouse over macros exist already, they just don't feel good to use, which goes for most macros in the game, to be honest, that are meant to be used during combat. So I think that kind of sums up everything. Overall, I had a pretty good experience playing healer in a serious environment for the first time, but unless my aesthetic is struggling to fill the healer role, I am most likely going to be on something else, as I do still like the tank gameplay the most, with DPS being a close second. But I'm really glad that I was able to get this experience of healing a week 1 Savage, and also finally clearing my first ultimate on healer, so I can't complain. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.